Good afternoon. So is everyone ready for an exciting presentation? I know I am. So a couple things. After this presentation, we certainly take questions and so forth. I also, if you have a question during the presentation, I have no problem taking that as well. Want to make it as interactive as possible. I have some content, but I like to also understand some of the thoughts and perspectives that you all have as well. Just from introductions, my name is Bill Guilmart. I run SAP's Enterprise Performance Management Solutions Group, which comprises a number of solutions for the Office of Finance. And I've been in this space for better than 15 years, working in a number of companies around the same topic. So that's myself and Karuna.
Hi everyone, my name is Karuna Mukherjee and I am part of the product marketing team for Enterprise Performance Management Solutions.
And so this really isn't a marketing spiel or product spiel. This is really about the trends we're seeing and how we're seeing the Office of Finance affected by a number of factors around the technology landscape of companies. Wanted to thank our sponsors as well. If you haven't had a chance, a number of the sponsors out back in the exhibit hall there, where you can take some time and understand more about their offerings and their solutions. So the title of the presentation today is really around transforming finance and driving reporting and analysis. So how many of you today have a big data strategy at your company? Show of hands, no? Yes? Looking to find the strategy for big data? Mobility analytics, right? Okay. So the key here is that for years, as an industry, we've been struggling to understand not only the data we need to report, but how to report it and what the impact of changes are on those reports. And so this graphic here really is, we want to take you from a place where there's a lot of information and a lot of procedures in developing reams and reams of reports, but really more into a forward-thinking process where you can be more prescriptive. And I think part of this is, cloud computing in particular has untethered ourselves from being connected to the network or being in the office. And what's more important about this is the ability to report on information and share that information is greater now. And we need ways in which to manage that process and be more self-servant, right? So, in many companies, IT organizations are trying to also meet the demand that you all have with regard to reporting. At the same time, there's a number of pressures. So the market's changing and the environment's changing. And this is the big business climate, right? It used to be, we could track and understand the types of things that are happening in our business on a regular basis. But there's a tremendous amount of volatility in the market. I was talking to someone earlier about, what separates different airlines. Is it the quality of their planes, the comfort of the seats? Is it the meals they give you or charge you for? No, it's really not. It's the ticket price, right? That's what separates a lot of the vendors today in the airline industry. And what drives the ticket price? Well, predominantly it's fuel costs, right? So, JetBlue, made a great, splash in the market by effectively understanding the volatility in the market for fuel. And they were able to stockpile fuel at a cost that allowed them to maintain the prices per seat per passenger on the airlines, while other airlines had to raise those. And I think what we see more and more is that commodity prices, impacts of the global market are impacting the decisions we make every day. The globalization is another aspect. Because today, I think about just what's happening with companies like Amazon and buying online and what that means to sales tax in different states, right? Think about the global economy. I go in there and my son wants, Beat headset, and there's a specific color he wants. And I go and Google that and I realize that provider is in the UK. Turns out it was a black market supplier because that is not an authorized color, right? But what's happening is we're buying more goods and services today from our iPhones, our mobile devices, our computers that we've never done before in the past. And there's all kinds of trade regulations around this thing. So increased globalization is impacting our business. And currency translation is another big area, right? When we think about the focus on risk, okay, how do you understand your enterprise risk of your company? Anyone who's picked up a board book and has read the proxy statement and understand the information that's in the declarations to the shareholders, right, understands that the risks have to be identified. We have to have mitigation against them. Some risks we don't know about until it's too late, right? And so these are major things that are impacting our business. And we've transformed from keeping track of the business to really understanding, hey, what's the impact of our margin? I mean, SAP as a company in particular, right? We look at what we're forecasting, we look at our margins, and we're very focused on, by the year 2015 to be at 33 or 32% margins, right? And we've had different approaches to get there, right? And the way we need to get there is to grow, but also to reduce costs, but be able to spend money in the right way. So the reality is that all of this stuff's going on, and we still have to deal with the regulations, right? We still have to comply. In the last few years, the SEC reporting with XBRL has been a huge issue for a number of companies, right? How do you deal with that change? How do you get on board with that? And how do you evolve it? And the reality is it's the tip of the iceberg. If you're a multinational company with operations across the globe, you'll find that you have to do different types of tax reporting. E-balance in Germany, in Europe, right? You start to look at IFRS and GAAP and the combination of those things. There's a lot of complexities there. Changing the way you look at your business and track your business. Not to mention the competition, okay? So it's not good enough now to understand, our product mix and our customer demographic. It's really what's the competition doing and how are they affecting us. Cloud companies, in particular in the software vendor space, have come on board because of the growth of the market. They're getting investment. So in Silicon Valley, it's back to investment and back to IPO, right? Well, what's that really mean to the corporations that are brick and mortar and haven't thought about the cloud? So competition in each of your organizations is critical, right? And what happens is you need to be able to benchmark, right? You have to know what your competitor's doing, why they're doing it, and how they're achieving the goals there. And so really, these things do impact the organization in particular. So the technology that's available today is radically different than the technology that was available in the years past. The amount of data is changing. The velocity change is changing. The whole notion is, I remember as a programmer, as a developer when I first got out of school, I worked for the Citigroup. And we had very limited data storage. It was expensive. So we wrote programs to address that. Then all of a sudden, data storage became easy. So now we had all this data, right? And memory became expensive, okay? And then this constant shift. What's happened today now is we have memory, we have real-time computing, we have access to large amounts of data storage. You can do it on your own site or you can do it in the cloud. So how do we deal with all this data? What do we do? What's our strategy for it? And is security a big issue? Absolutely, right? So when we think about this, data is growing in different ways. The volume of data is growing. I just read something that said that 80% of the data provides 20% of the value, and that the data that's growing so rapidly is we don't even understand whether it's relevant or not. Okay, so I walk into a store, and if I'm on Facebook, it tells you where I'm at. Well, so, right? How do you make that into a tangible piece of data? Or, someone's tweeting about this product, or, an athlete endorses some, new drink, right? What does that mean to my forecast? What does it mean to that forecast in that region? So there's the volume of data. We don't know a lot about it, but it's growing. There's a different variety of data that's happening. And most of the data that's coming today is unstructured data. So the transaction data that we have, that we've built systems around, is there. But what do we do, and how do we bridge that gap with unstructured data? And the fact of the matter is, when you have information and you get a report, or you look at something on your mobile device, and you have two questions about it, you want to be able to drill into that data and get access to it, right? You don't want to wait another day to format a report. So the reality is that the type of data is changing, the way we access the data is changing, and we want our systems to be more intelligent. We want them to prescribe or have us look at certain things, right? So now we're looking at outliers. What are the exceptions, and why do those things occur? So all of these things are happening both in the systems of record, the transaction systems, and around the profitability and analysis places. So what are CFOs struggling with, right? I mean, I asked you folks. So what are your key concerns right now? Anybody have any concerns? I mean, to me, we take data, we look at the information, we understand our business, and we try to rationalize the outcome, right? We're trying to tell the story about what happened. We're not in a position to actually understand, okay, this is what happened, how can we change, and what's the future going to be, right? How do we raise expectations? How do we understand when our consensus numbers aren't going to be there as we predicted them, right? How do we understand what the impact of all of this stuff is on our bottom line? To me, it's more about, the inability for us to add time to analyze information, to look for trends, to be able to understand that in our forecasts, in our plans, in our budgets. And there's a concept around integrated business planning. Any of you familiar with integrated business planning? So you build your financial plan, okay? You look at it, you say, okay, this is where we want to be EPS, this is where we want to be with our margins, this looks like the right mix, this is the number of salespeople we need to sell the products, et cetera. Here's our expenses, fully blown, right? So you say, okay, let's put that plan into play. Now you've got production capacity, right? You've got raw materials, you've got inventory costs, you've got a number of different supplier networks that you're dealing with, and all of a sudden there's a fire at one of the factories. What did that capacity loss mean to that financial plan, right? You have to quickly align your operational goals to your financial goals, right? And reset that. Well, you can't do that if you're doing an annual budget or plan, right? You have to have a rolling forecast. You have to understand what that means. You think about the global world. I mean, what if you're Hyatt Hotels and in Africa there's a bombing across the street from your hotel? And now all the people that are planned to go there will not be there for a period of time, right? What are you going to do? How do you handle that situation, right? Or you have an expansion, you have renovations, and you think about I'm going to do floors, 10 through 20, and that plan takes longer to do that construction than you anticipated, right? How does that impact your margin? So the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of things in our business that we're not even thinking about, and the reality is that it's time consuming to just do the work we're doing today. So we find that more and more people are dealing with the financial analysis and reporting and just a lot of data. How to make sense of it. What does it mean, right? Am I looking at data that has the impact of the business? And the fact of the matter is that we're making decisions still in limited time. When you track the progress of putting together your statements, getting the data right, going back and forth, and everyone feeling comfortable at that process, you're down to, 1 day, 2 days left. What else can you do, right? There's not a lot of flexibility. So when we look at the top priorities, when we poll executives in finance, they believe that half their time should be spent on high-value activities. And yet, we're not spending that time at all. Our ability to control costs is important, right? It's about, hey, I understand what the profitability of the company needs to be, but how do I get there, right? How do I support and fund the growth activities? So how do I remember, in one of the jobs I had, we talked about moving some development things offshore for development, right? Well, how are we going to pay for that? We had to fund that from our existing operation, which meant we had to transfer resources. We had to do a job reduction in order to actually generate enough money to fund this expansion. Okay. At the same time, we had to deliver, right? So these are issues that are facing companies every day. So here are a number of the initiatives from a highest perspective. And to me, if you look at 2012 to 2013, you move from performance measurement, scorecarding, and dashboarding to looking at planning and budgeting and forecasting. So how many of you today have a planning, budgeting, forecasting solution that you're using? Everybody? How many are using Excel? Okay? And this is not uncommon, right? Yet this is one of the most critical aspects of our business. So in my opinion, everybody does their plan and their budget, but they don't really do a good job at forecasting and rolling forecasting like I talked about. So there's ways in which we can improve our processes. And people are spending money on this. And the whole idea is, if you look at this predictive modeling, okay, a number of people looking at that, financial consolidation reporting, okay, top priority. Customer profit, product and profitability. That is one of the key areas that's been growing and growing over the last few years because of the economic situations. So these are the things that people are focusing on today. And I think that these two top ones here, performance measurement, dashboard and reporting, are tied very closely with planning and budgeting. So if we look at this, we look at the trends of the market, we look at where we've been, what's evolving? How are we going to evolve the finance department? This is what we've been focused on. Producing reports, governance, cutting costs, managing the plans, distributing information to many stakeholders, right? And really trying to support the business. But in fact, what we need to be doing is transforming ourselves into more predictive planning capabilities. Looking at our cost analysis more strategically. Becoming more of a trusted advisor in the organization. And also looking for ways to grow the business, right? Because with growth, there's expense. You can't grow, on a zero-based budget. It's very hard to do, right? You're shifting one cost to another area, and you don't know until it's too late to drive that. And, the innovation, how we innovate with our customers, our products and services, or even our procedures. Most of the impact that we see happen with organizations that adopt a formal planning, budgeting, and forecasting process isn't so much the software, it's what they learn in implementing the software about the business and the process. So that's where the true gains also occur. We have long been tied to this annual plan and the budget analysis and variance analysis between actual and plan, right? The information is very important, but our FP&A groups, in our financial reporting groups, and our compliance organizations, they're not using the same systems in many situations. They're using data from those systems. So how do they visualize that, and how do they share that information? So as we look at this market, and we look at the trends that are happening to the business, there's some things that are happening in technology. So mobility. How many of you today bring your own devices to work? Okay? A number of you. It used to be the company had to distribute and give you a device, right? Whole other level of asset tracking and managing those things. Mobility is something that I struggle with myself, right? Taking a picture of my receipts and putting together my trip reports to get them, reimbursed, right? There's just a whole plethora of things that are involved in that. What's your mobile device? What are you using? How do you do it? Is it clear? Are the receipts done effectively? So these are things that we're trying to deal with, trying to cut costs at the same time to introduce change, right? The average CFO in age is changing. Newer CFOs are coming into they're very attuned to technology, right? Board of directors and people that have been in the business for a number of years, they're adopting technology, less frequently. And when it's forced upon you, it's really challenging. So if some of these things from a technology perspective are driving the business, it's hard if you're not on that learning curve. So mobile is certainly something that's dealing with a number of changes across the organization. And how about, analytics and reporting, okay? The data that's coming out into the systems. How many of you get reports on your mobile devices today? Many? Few? Okay. Would you like reports on your mobile devices, right? And then once you had that report on your mobile device, wouldn't you like to be able to do something with it as opposed to just view it, right? So there's a lot of barriers in the market here. Now you've got to have a mobile platform strategy, or you've got to have a way to do this, right? It used to be this was really challenging. Today it's more easy. I actually had an iPhone that I needed to trade in. I had to change my provider. So I had this iPhone that was from AT&T, and my new provider was Verizon. So it's sitting at my desk, and my son comes into my office and says, "Dad, what are you doing with that old phone?" I said, "Well, nothing. I'm going to return it in or try to get some money for it." "Well, don't do that. I could use it." "Well, how can you use it?" "Well, we have Wi-Fi in the house, or I can go to a hotspot and I can get online and chat." "What do you mean you can chat? How can you chat? You don't have a service." "No, there's this new service I can get online that I can chat for free." He taught me in 5 minutes more about that phone than I had in the 2 years that I owned the thing, right? So the reality is this whole idea of mobility is changing. It's not just about the devices the iPads and the Android devices. It's about how those are used and what the interaction is with the information, the data. Because sometimes you look at it and you don't know if you should tap it, swipe it, what to do, right? So mobility is more about just the data getting out there. It's about how do I interface with the system, right? So the analytics also changes there. As many vendors like SAP drive analytics out to a mobile platform. But then you start thinking about, okay, now I have this mobile device in my hand. I'm on the phone. Someone wants to know what the sales forecast is, right? I should be able to pull that up. Then you have to deal with this thing like in-memory computing. Okay, what's that mean for this whole thing? Well, this is speed. This is performance, right? So now I have the ability to touch it and get the response back instead of waiting, right? How many of you ever used the GPS before when you first got your phone and you go in and I was driving in California, I remember once, and I was trying to get to an appointment, and the GPS was searching, right? It was looking at reroute, and I'm sitting, I got to drive, where am I going to go? There's a bunch of exits coming on, right? Used to be a delay. Now, the thing is almost automatic, right? You start to rely on those things. And so in-memory computing has actually changed the way we expect the systems to respond. The ability to do, for instance, SKU level planning, okay? Something that's very difficult to do. So think about the phone industry, mobile customers and phones, right? How do you look at the numbers and the volumes of contracts and customers that are rolling off those things? So we think about promotions and profitability. So the idea here is that these three dimensions, in-memory computing, business analytics, and mobility, are transforming society and our businesses. So what's the benefit, what's the value, right? So if someone comes to you and says, we need to get into this big data thing. We have to have this stuff available on a mobile device. What's it really translate to, right? What's the value behind that? And I think one of the things that's important is not so much the ability to have access to these types of things in real time, but it's really how you leverage them to make decisions, right? It's really how you think about your business differently. Because if you get a lot of data fast, it doesn't necessarily make good sense, right? You've got to have the right information to make the right decisions, so you have to ask the right questions. And those are the things you can't build in standard reports. You can't say, hey, please give me analysis of profitability by region, by product. You have to actually be able to drive and drill into those things. So the whole idea is that you want to have enabling real-time decisions to make approvals, to make these processes happen, but you also want to be able to operationalize it. And then the biggest thing is, how do you collaborate, right? So collaboration is an important capability that you get by having big data analytics and a mobile framework, right? You have to be able to communicate with employees, with people inside your network or outside the network. So the question is, at the end of the day, what's all this technology going to enable, right? Is it going to help me run my business more effectively? Will I be able to look at the business and the insights that I'm able to derive from this and be able to make decisions that help drive the business? And what's it matter about data, high volume transaction processing, if you don't understand your business, right? So here's the key. How does this fit into our planning and budgeting and forecasting process? So those of you that raise your hand that says, hey, I'm using spreadsheets, right? Well, you're keeping track of the business. What do you want to do now if you look at different trends in your business and you want to do a forecast in different scenarios and you want to understand how successful that was quarter to quarter, month to month, right? So you want to do some variance analysis. But what you want to find out are, what are my drivers for my business, right? Because maybe what you were planning your business on before wasn't the right set of constraints or requirements. So at the end of the day, you want to have the ability to predict and analyze and have transparency to your information. So you always want to be on, right? You always want to be connected and have access to that information. Because when someone asks you a question, you want to be able to respond. But that question often leads to 4 or 5 other questions too, right? So as we look at this and we think about all of these things happening, what are the things that people are doing for best practices? Karuna's going to talk a bit about our customers. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to be more agile with the organization, make better decisions, right, and be able to drive the costs down and leverage the investments you make to drive the business. So in this case, ensuring everyone understands how to succeed in the organization. So if you think about this, how do you align the strategy to execution, right? What are the 5 key things the company needs to achieve to be successful in 2013? And then be able to take those KPIs, the way you're going to track it, cascade them out to individuals in the organization so they know what their role and responsibility is, right? So if we're keeping track of the business, we need to understand that everyone else is understanding how their function improves or contributes to the success of the business. And so you want to be able to streamline both the information flow, but also the planning process, and you want to be able to understand what the impact is of a certain KPI or risk. Okay? So in real time, you want to understand that you've got a problem with your forecast. You've got a problem with customer sentiment on a certain product or a certain launch of a product in the market, right? So you've got to be able to track those things more effectively. So as I mentioned before, faster access to information is important. But the problem here is how do we build a strategy for taking that information and analyzing it, right? And so we have to have a group of people that understand the business and are able to visualize this. So we need tools that enable a best practice of analytical analysis, okay? And these are tools that are modeling tools that are around predictive capabilities, look at forecasting, look at different trends in the business. And decision makers really need to have this at their fingertips, right? They need to feel comfortable that the data is reliable. So I know as a user of information myself, if there's information that I get that seems inconsistent with results that I have in other systems, it's a problem. And I spent half my time trying to figure out why is it inconsistent, then I actually look at the data and understand what the value is for me. So at the end of the day, you have to have trust in this. And part of this whole notion is having one place where the information can be stored and accessed. So standardization is another thing. You know, we want to have a best-in-class, best way of providing this information both to the street and internal stakeholders. And so we have to be able to have confidence in the number, to be able to put information on the background of those numbers. So analysis or notes around that information. Now, there's a large disparity between people that are best in class and how they do things, effectively. If we look at this, the disparity here between the costs as a percentage of revenue, okay? 8% is average, best in class is 4%, okay? That's a pretty extensive gap between, a best in class company and, a low performer. If we look at the days to close their books, so, the close process, on average, 14.8 days. Best is 7 days, okay? Big disparity here as well. What's the value of closing the books faster, okay? Is it to push your numbers to the street quicker? No. It's to understand what the numbers mean and how to describe and forecast what the future is going to hold. And I can tell you right now that with all of the regulations required from a reporting perspective, that the close cycle is shrunk. Okay? You still have the same number of days to close your books, but you have to do more in a faster environment. Days sales outstanding, a key metric. Look at the gap here, 52 to 43 days. I mean, that's huge. That's cash flow. That's ability to working capital. That's the understanding how you could run your business, right? So cash forecasting is a huge area that we want to get better at. We want to be able to understand, how to reconcile our business. And again, these 3 things are key performance metrics when we look at best in class versus what we need to be doing. So in order to increase, boost, and expand our business, we have to think about what are the capabilities that we need to provide. So at SAP, we have a solution called SAP Planning and Consolidation. And what it does is it provides the ability to do more agile planning, be able to streamline the process, as well as to engage stakeholders. So the key thing is this, right? We have to have a way that we can build a plan, push it out to an organization, have that tracked, go through approval processes, and then engage in other people in the consensus to be able to pick which scenarios to go with, and then be able to track those things. And to do that, we need to have a system that can both manage that centrally, but also distribute that out, so that you can use an iPad, for instance, to capture your sales or revenue data. and they will fill that into the plan. And then use the reporting capabilities of that same iPad device to report on that information. We also have a solution around profitability and cost management. So in order to align our revenue goals with our targets, right? Understand what those best practices are and how we can be competitive with our solutions, and then look at what the costs are in each one of those products or customer acquisitions, and be able to improve our customer satisfaction. So an example would be, look at TV manufacturers, those that are going from plasma to LCD. And they think about the explosion of that market and then going to 3D. How do they divert marketing dollars for some of those other products into the programs they're going to launch? And then how do they address what the cost of sale is, and how do they look at their margins? So improving their customer satisfaction, but also improving internally their profit and margin capabilities. And finally, the strategic alignment with strategy management. So I talked before about cascading goals down through an organization. So really being able to identify the priorities of the company, of your group, being able to preserve the accountability across that organization by communicating what they are and tracking the success factors in there, and then monitoring that along the way, and being able to use that as a measure of your performance, so that you know before you get into the reporting of information where you stand with regard to your goals and objectives. So the key here really, I think, is what we're trying to do is provide the Office of Finance with innovation and technology, but in a way that's consumable to help drive the business. So in-memory, for the sake of in-memory, doesn't matter. But if you want to be more responsive, to understand and analyze your data quicker, you have to have a platform that both captures this information and provides you tools to get into the information, to look for patterns, to look at insight, and to make it operationable. And the whole idea is that it has to be flexible, meaning that you can't be tethered to your systems today. You have to be able to do that in any place, any location. So mobility is a key innovator of this change, without question. And what we find is access to information and collaboration on these platforms is critical. So the key here is to tie your processes that you have today with a mobile infrastructure to enable this type of collaboration. So just putting your applications on a mobile device won't change the business. You've got to innovate. So at SAP, enterprise performance management is really around these dimensions: strategizing and planning, analyzing and optimizing, and closing and disclosing. So each one of these areas, we provide technology and services that support this process for both big data as well as the ability to translate that big data into actionable objectives, KPIs and metrics. So the whole strategy is along the way you could start anywhere, from the close to disclose process to analyzing and optimizing or strategy and planning. It could be a top-down process, or it could be a process that starts in the middle. At the heart of it, though, it's process, it's technology, it's people, and it's the process of feeding that information from a high-level goal and plan strategy to the execution and then reporting on it. So this kind of graphic shows, an assessment of fumblers and fact finders, leaders and laggards. Okay, the whole idea is that in order to make sense of the data, okay, you have to start with a model. You have to start with understanding your business and how does your business relate to the market and to your financials, right? So you have to be able to understand the information that's structured in a transaction system, but also information coming from multiple sources. So when you introduce all this information, you're starting to bring it together, right? And you may have to build different types of plans and models for different segments of your organization, but the most important thing is, as you do this, you'll develop patterns, and those patterns may prove to be drivers in your business, okay? So this notion about data manipulation and predictability all comes from understanding not only the data in your business, but also in other businesses. So you have to be able to look at leveraging it for competitive advantage, but understanding more about those patterns. And how well do you leverage this data is really critical. So you can take all the benchmark information from your market and your business as possible, and you can take your operations as they exist today. But how do you bridge that gap? So how do you bring the competitive advantage to your business?